Nice. Okay, so let's think about our structure, okay? Because we have now done, how are you guys feeling with body paragraphs, like with writing them? Because basically what I was looking at in the homework with you guys, that's basically what I want you guys to be doing in terms of body paragraphs, okay? I want you to be putting the quotes together with your point sentence, your link sentence, and the only thing that changes really is that there is a little bit of linking into the question happening in the background throughout. Okay, so that's what we need to kind of adjust ourselves with. We need to kind of, give ourselves a little bit more leeway in terms of adding those bits in. That's why those paragraphs end up being a little bit longer. So let's talk about the structure of an intro and the structure of a conclusion. Okay, so there are really two things you need to do inside your intro, which is answer the question and introduce your arguments. Now, you can do this in different structures, but what I would recommend is kind of just breaking it. So you need to answer the question and introduce arguments. I would break it down into one thesis sentence, which is kind of like your whole point summed up into one sentence. So this could look like kind of rewording the question to give it as a solid, firmly answered statement. Sometimes you might not even have to, add too much because the question is framed in kind of a way where it's like, explore how the author does blah, 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 blah. You would just say the author throughout the novel does blah, 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 right? You would kind of just state it as your, bam, that's your thesis sentence. So that should be your first sentence. Within this sentence, you should also introduce the novel. And on typed things, just for like a little bit of admin, on typed things, you underline the novel. So Hatchet, and you give the year in brackets. Okay, let me just check on what the year is. – 1987. No. 1986. Depends. Okay, I think 1987 is probably the year. Anyway, you're not gonna lose marks for saying 1987 versus 1986. Okay, so introduce the novel and the author. Gary Paulson, I believe. Give me 1 second. Just gonna check that one. Yes, it is. Okay. All right. So now this is really the only time that you need to say Gary is in this sentence. Then we don't need to say Gary anymore. We can just say Paulson. Okay. Or just the author. All right. So you introduce the novel, the author. Now you might want to have an elaboration sentence. You kind of just put into context a bit more. Maybe mention the character's journey, something like that. I'll show you an example. And then you want to introduce your arguments. Okay, so does that kind of make sense for how you structure an intro? I think it would only really make sense after we do an example. So let's have a look at an essay question. So let's say, to what extent does Hatchet suggest? This is a good kind of structure that you might see of an essay question quite a lot, is like this, to what extent? Because really, your answer to the question is, well, let's just finish the question. To what extent does Hatchet suggest that, let's say, personal growth is only possible through confronting hardship? Okay. So your answer to this question is basically Hatchet really suggests that personal growth is only possible through confronting hardship. Okay, or Hatchet suggests, or Hatchet explores the idea that personal growth is. So basically, do you guys see how these kind of questions, where it's like to what extent does, and then basically just a statement, your thesis is kind of just saying that statement. Unless you want to disagree, the question is giving you the opportunity to say Hatchet suggests that personal growth is not only possible through confronting hardship. But, sometimes the questions are kind of giving you a bit of a layup, and they don't want you to airball by saying no. There is no, point to personal growth here. So here, I think you would be agreeing with the question. Okay, so this is all a little bit higgledy-piggledy. Let's put this a bit smaller so we can see that comes under that. Okay, so now this is our question. So if I was to write an intro to this question, I want you guys to write a thesis sentence. Write the one thesis sentence that you think would work here. Remember, the one sentence where you've answered that question. Like I said, answering this question is really just repeating it back on itself. But then also kind of sliding in, throughout the novel, Hatchet, 1987, Gary Paulson suggests. That kind of idea. Okay? So I want you to try and come up with one thesis sentence. I'll also be writing an intro here as well. Okay. And yeah, we're going to go into it. So yeah, give that a go. I'll give you guys like 30 seconds to a minute actually to just get started on that. Probably only will need 30 seconds just to write one sentence. And then we will discuss it. So I'll just give you guys a moment. Okay, I think that's enough time to kind of give you guys an opportunity to start on that. So let's now think about how we might word this sentence. So all I need to do is just reword it. So, and then also add in the bits that we talked about in terms of the novel and the author. So I might say something along the lines of, Hatchet throughout Hatchet, Gary Paulson emphasizes that personal growth is attained solely through experiencing hardship and overcoming. So do you guys see how, have I really reinvented the wheel here? No, not really. I haven't, gone crazy and made an entire plan about how I'm going to answer this question and all the cool points I'm going to come up with. No, you don't need that. You just need to reword it. I kind of added a bit more like, confronting hardship. Why didn't I say experiencing hardship and overcoming challenges? They're kind of similar ideas, but at least it looks like I'm adding more of my own point. And then again, I'm just putting the title, this kind of thing. And then, yeah, the rest is kind of just rewording it. So do you guys essentially see how this is basically rewording the question, but adding the title and the author? I'm trying to give you guys a structure that you can then replicate every time. Because the thing is, in primary school, the essays, were all about kind of having a cool little hook and a nice little sentence to really get your readers hooked in. But the problem is in high school, it shifts a lot more to just having a nice structure that you can replicate, because the time crunch is pretty crazy. In high school, usually for paragraphs, I would say in general, it's around 200 per paragraph, with maybe 100 for the intro and conclusion. Intro is a bit longer than conclusion, so maybe 120 and 80. So that totals to around 800. I'd say the average high school A essay is around 700 to 800 words. That in general. Now, the goal is to get to year 12 where you can do like 800 to 1,000 words in like 40 minutes. That's including checking your work, which is pretty crazy. However, at this stage, I don't want you to do that. Obviously, that's year 12. And so aiming for the similar amount of words, like 700 to 800, is probably a good goal, though. Okay. Because really not much. Like when you go through high school, it doesn't get longer. It just gets, your analysis gets a little bit sharper, gets a bit more sophisticated. You learn better, newer techniques. If anything, you actually learn about how to shorten down your writing a bit. Okay. Okay. And we're gonna continue on. I just because we've got a few things to get through. I don't think you guys need a break. We've only got 10 minutes left anyway. Now that you're in high school, breaks within an hour class are unfortunately no longer the norm. So after this sentence, you want to elaborate. Okay. So you then kind of say, as the reader follows, and then, we're kind of introducing a little bit about the character. As the reader follows the protagonist, Brian, or the protagonist's gradual shift from a state of despair into one of resilience, we gain an appreciation for of hardship in shaping him. Something like this. So really, my next sentence, this is where you can think a bit more about it. I kind of just blobbed one down there just to illustrate what I'm doing. Is we're kind of like showing a little bit about, elaborating a bit more. I'm not being specific. You still are not saying anything about like, this is shown through Brian's mental state. I'm just trying to show a little bit about the overall journey. Gradual shift from a state of despair into one of resilience. We kind of talked about how he started in despair, builds into something resilient. And then, kind of shaping maybe his journey. And then just linking it a bit into hardship. So do you see this one? It's just elaborating, kind of introducing the character, and a little bit about the overall story. Okay. And I think that's all you really need to do there. Then you need to introduce your argument. So let's presume we have 3 arguments. Okay. And really, when you're preparing essays, let's say you have a test. And this will happen from years, depending on what school you go to, this will happen from year 7, year 8 in high school, is you'll have an unknown test. Okay. They are going to give you a question that you will have never seen before. And depending on what school you go to, sometimes you'll need to memorize quotes, sometimes you won't. It really just differs. It's not going to show that one school's better than another. There's benefits and cons to being able to bring in your own quotes, that kind of thing. But you need to at least be prepared for the idea that you need to be able to know enough about a book that you can go into an essay blind and just have some quotes memorized that you can then analyze. And so I'm not saying I want you guys to be able to do that. What I'm saying is that needs to be possible. So the way that we do that is you kind of come up with themes that you're going to be using for your paragraphs, okay? So when you have your quote banks that you're going to be continuing to do, so the other homework, okay, so your homework is going to be, firstly, read an additional 5 chapters and add 5 more quotes to your quote bank. Your quote bank should now be how many quotes long? After this homework task, 15 quotes long, including techniques and brief points on analysis. Okay, if it's any less than that, coming up to this lesson, add extras, okay, so that it is now 15 quotes long, okay? I mean, 1 quote a chapter is not too much to ask, but having 15 quotes is really nice. Like, it's actually really nice. You don't really need to, only adding 5. So, this is already, we're going to have another week or 2 in this novel, I think, to be able to add more quotes before you have to write an essay on it. You write an additional 5 onto your existing 10. But this will be enough then that you really don't need to think too much about essays anymore. Once you have your quotes there, you can just kind of, it's almost like a jigsaw puzzle, which is kind of cool. After doing this homework, you've read an additional 5 chapters. You've read 10 so far, hopefully at least. So an additional 5 would bring you to 15. Okay. Does anyone know how many chapters are there in the novel? This is something I should know. I know, but because I want to see if we're going to pan out to finishing it on time. Let me just look it up. There are 19 chapters. Nice. And an epilogue. So there are 20 chapters, basically. Cool. So one more week, you get to read the last 4 plus the epilogue. That'll be really nice. That worked out nicely. Whoever thought of 5 chapters, wow, what a genius. I must have had a look at the novel in week 1. Okay. So, and then the next one is answer the following essay question with, I'll say 600 to 800 words. Okay. So, yeah. Guys, if you think about this, I don't think this is too crazy. I don't know if people are surprised or not as to whether it's long or short. But if you think about the paragraphs you guys did, they were like 150 words or so. If you did let's say you did 600 or 700 on your last task, we're now adding an intro and a conclusion. So if anything, you would need to cut off words of what you already did. Right, if you think about this. Okay, intro, we did this. Now we introduce our paragraph. So what I was saying is you develop themes to your paragraphs, or you develop themes to your quotes that you will then use as a kind of topic for your paragraph. So what are some themes? What are some themes, guys, that you would say are in Hatchet? Comment down below. What are some themes that you guys would say are in Hatchet? Just general themes, whatever you can think of. Yes, I intentionally did not give you 600 to 700 words. Yeah, okay, so adaptation, bravery, I like that. I think transformation is a very, overall theme you see. The force of nature and what nature can do. Trying to find independence, isolation, that experience. I think this novel is just such a great one for themes. Okay. So let's say we wanted to use these 3 as my themes. My next sentence in my intro is then just basically just name dropping the themes. You just signpost the themes. Okay. We call it signposting because you're not really explaining it too much. You're just like identifying it so that it has been mentioned. So let's say my first paragraph is going to be about transformation, how we appreciate the impact of personal growth through the character's gradual transformation throughout the novel. I think maybe transformation might be a bit too like the essay is about transformation itself. So maybe I might actually be better off doing these 3. Okay. And so, yeah, so what I would say here is like this is highlighted through the force of nature providing intense hardship or something. So I'm just kind of trying to link it a little bit into this. Providing intense hardship, the independence Brian gains through his journey, and the isolation he inevitably experiences. I have no experience. Okay, so do you see how I've just name dropped the themes? Do you guys see that? I've just name dropped the themes. There's lots of different themes, any that you can think of. I want you to kind of look at your quotes and be like, these 3 are about isolation. These 2 are around independence. These 3 are about resilience, whatever. If you can think of themes that you have 3 quotes on, then that can be one of your themes, and that can be a paragraph that you are allowed to now do. Okay? So, that's your intro. Do you guys understand the structure of an intro? Answer the question with 1 sentence. Okay? Elaborate in your next sentence where you're kind of introducing the novel, character, that kind of thing. And then your 3 arguments here. This is 3 different arguments that I've now explained. Okay, so that's the structure of an intro. Conclusion, basically the same thing. You can kind of skip out the middle sentence. You can just do one of these and one of these. Okay? So if you were to do 600 words, really, let's see. I'd say 150, 150, 150 for your body paragraphs. And to do 800, I'd say, so this would be your range for your body paragraphs that you should be aiming for. And then what does that leave you? So that's 450 for the body paragraphs, and we've got an extra 150. So how I would divide 150 up is I'd probably go like maybe 80 words intro, 70 words conclusion, maybe, you know, around this. I'm not trying to keep it directly like that, but try to do something like this. There you go. That would be my rough, where the upper bounds adds up to 800, the lower bounds adds up to 600. The two sides of it. Okay? Excuse me. Yeah, I'm not going to be looking at your word count per paragraph, okay? To be honest, this is more for you guys to try and get into the structure. If you are writing less, then you're either just including less quotes and less analysis, in which case it'll just compromise the essay. And if you're doing more, then you're being a bit too waffly. So this is more so a goal for you to try and make sure to get the best out of your writing, okay? All right. So that's how you do an intro. Then your body paragraphs we've worked on. You just do your point, your 3 cups of tea, and your link. Okay. So each body paragraph. Remember what cups of tea is? Your technique, evidence, and analysis, with a point and link on each side. Are you guys feeling like you remember how to do body paragraphs? That was kind of last lesson's focus. That's why this lesson I focused a bit more on intros. Yeah. All right. Cool. So I look forward to reading through some essays. I think next week we'll probably again follow a similar structure where it's kind of like we're looking at a whole essay, maybe 2 people's or something. Anyway, guys, that's going to be where we're going to leave it. This is your homework and reading the additional chapters. It's been a pleasure. Hopefully that went by nice and swiftly, and you guys can now enjoy your dinner. I too will be enjoying my dinner. But great job. You guys did well today, and I look forward to seeing you guys next week. All right? Cool. See you later. Bye-bye for now.